What if the next major flashpoint in Asia doesn't begin with China making the first move, but with North Korea lighting a fuse somewhere else? That's the question hanging over this story right now, and it matters a lot more than I think most people realize. As I'm recording this on April 9th, the headlines are shifting away from the Middle East for a moment and toward a dangerous pattern developing on the Korean peninsula. North Korea is not just launching missiles again, it is also publicly signaling new weapons capabilities, showing off systems it clearly wants the world to notice, and doing all of this as high-level talks with China are back on the table. Put those pieces together and you start to see why this is not just another routine provocation. Because when North Korea acts, it is rarely random. There is usually a message inside the timing, and the timing here is what should catch your attention.
China is still the central player in any future Taiwan crisis. That part hasn't changed. But if Beijing ever decides to push further toward a military move on Taiwan, it would benefit enormously if the United States and its allies were suddenly forced to divide their attention. That is where North Korea becomes relevant. If Pyongyang can create panic or pressure involving South Korea or Japan, even without launching a full-scale war, it could complicate the entire strategic picture in the Pacific. That possibility alone makes everything we're seeing right now worth watching very closely. Before we go deeper, take a second to support the channel if you enjoy breakdowns like this. Drop your thoughts below too, because I genuinely want to know how you see this. Do you think North Korea is bluffing? Do you think these weapons claims are exaggerated? Or do you think we are looking at the early stages of a broader alignment that could become a serious problem later on? Let me know.
Now, here's what happened. On Wednesday, April 8th, Japanese authorities announced that they had detected multiple suspected ballistic missile launches from North Korea. The initial public alert was brief and direct. A possible ballistic missile had been launched, and more information would follow. That kind of announcement always gets attention, but what makes it more serious with North Korea is the way Pyongyang handles these tests compared to other major powers. When countries like the United States, China, or Russia conduct missile tests, there is usually some level of prior notification. Not because they want to be polite, but because the alternative is dangerous. Missiles are one of those things you do not want misread in real time. History is filled with moments where radar signals, launch detections, or military movements nearly triggered major escalation because somebody thought a test might be an actual strike.
So states typically warn each other in advance. They let other governments know that sensors may pick something up, that the launch is controlled, and that no one should panic. North Korea operates differently. It does not follow that norm. It does not announce these launches ahead of time to reduce tension. It fires, and everyone else has to react after the fact. That means militaries in the region have to immediately evaluate whether what they're seeing is a test, a signal, a provocation, or the beginning of something worse. That uncertainty is part of the threat. It forces the United States, Japan, South Korea, and others to respond quickly and seriously every single time. And that is one reason North Korea remains such a uniquely dangerous actor. It doesn't just possess weapons. It uses unpredictability as a weapon of its own. As more information came in, the picture became clearer. South Korea's military said North Korea had fired multiple short-range ballistic missiles toward the sea. This was reportedly the second launch event in just 2 days. The timing also came shortly after a North Korean official issued harsh rhetoric dismissing hopes for better relations with Seoul. So this was not happening in a vacuum. It came with political messaging attached. According to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff, several missiles were launched from the Wonsan area on North Korea's eastern coast on Wednesday morning. They reportedly flew around 150 miles toward waters to the northeast. There was also reporting that one of the missile flights covered more than 700 kilometers off the northeast coast. Japan's defense ministry later assessed that at least one missile landed outside Japan's exclusive economic zone. That's important because it means the launches were provocative without crossing one of the most obvious escalation lines. North Korea often plays that game, push hard enough to create fear, but stop just short of triggering an immediate military response.
South Korea's military responded by saying it remains ready to counter provocations under its alliance framework with the United States. There was also mention of an earlier projectile launched from near the North Korean capital region on Tuesday that may have experienced a problem shortly after launch. In other words, at least one recent test may not have gone as planned. And that matters too, because with missile programs, even failed launches provide useful data. A failure is not always a setback in the broader sense. It can still help refine engineering, timing, propulsion, and launch procedure for the next attempt. So what were these missiles likely to be? There are a few possibilities.
One likely candidate is the Hwasong-7, a medium-range ballistic missile that uses liquid fuel and traces its roots back to older Soviet Scud-based designs. North Korea developed it decades ago, and estimates have suggested an inventory somewhere around 200 to 300 missiles, although the number of operational launchers is believed to be much lower, possibly under 100. That distinction matters. Having missiles in storage is one thing, having enough functional launchers to deploy them effectively is another. We've seen in other conflicts that stockpiles can look impressive on paper, but launch capacity often becomes the real bottleneck. Another possible system is the Puggoksong-2, an intermediate-range ballistic missile unveiled in the late 2010s and believed to be nuclear capable. There is also the KN-25, a more recent system with a shorter range developed in 2019, reportedly capable of striking targets out to roughly 240 miles. So depending on the exact launch profile, North Korea has several systems it could have used here. The bigger point is not just which missile left the launcher. The bigger point is that Pyongyang is maintaining a pace of activity that keeps regional defenses on alert and reminds everyone that its arsenal is not static. It is active, expanding, and still being refined. But the missile launches are only part of the story. The more unsettling part may be what North Korea is now claiming to have tested beyond those launches. According to Reuters, North Korea tested a new cluster bomb warhead for a ballistic missile and also conducted a test involving an electromagnetic weapon, and that is where this story moves from familiar provocation into a more worrying category. Cluster munitions themselves are not some revolutionary invention. The world knows what those are. They've been around for a long time and they remain controversial for obvious reasons. But an electromagnetic capability is a different matter. If North Korea is genuinely working to develop EMP-style weapons, that suggests an interest in disabling infrastructure, not just destroying physical targets. An EMP is designed to generate a powerful pulse that can disrupt or destroy electronics and electrical systems. In modern societies, that can be devastating. You're not just talking about lights going out. You're talking about communications, control systems, power grids, transportation nodes, emergency response networks, the kinds of systems that make a country function.
On top of that, North Korea also reportedly tested carbon fiber bombs tied to mobile short-range air defense systems. And if that sounds obscure, it's actually more dangerous than it sounds. A carbon fiber bomb, sometimes referred to as a blackout bomb or a graphite bomb, is not meant to level a city in the traditional sense. It works differently. It detonates in the air and spreads highly conductive fibers across electrical infrastructure. Those fibers get tangled in transformers, substations, and power lines, creating short circuits and widespread disruption. So instead of a giant fireball and collapsed buildings, you get a different kind of damage. Darkened cities, crippled infrastructure, interrupted command systems, and a society suddenly struggling to function. It is not cinematic in the way people imagine warfare, but it can be brutally effective.
North Korean officials reportedly described these as special military assets. That wording is interesting because it tells you how they want these systems to be perceived. They are not presenting them as side projects or technical experiments. They are presenting them as strategic tools, assets, capabilities with a purpose. That is a message not just to South Korea or Japan, but also to Washington. And then there is another major development: MIRV capability, multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. That sounds technical, but the concept is simple enough. Instead of one missile carrying one warhead to one target, a MIRV-equipped missile can release several warheads after reaching a certain point in flight. Those warheads then separate and move toward different targets independently. From a defense standpoint, that is a nightmare. It makes missile interception far more complicated because instead of trying to stop one object, you may suddenly be dealing with several. The missile most likely associated with that capability is the Hwasong-19, a solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile that North Korea first tested in October 2024. Reports have suggested a range of around 9,300 miles and nuclear carrying potential. If those numbers hold, that puts most of the continental United States within reach. And once you combine long-range delivery with MIRV potential, you move into a much more serious strategic category. This is no longer just about regional harassment. It becomes part of a broader deterrence and threat equation involving the US homeland itself. At the same time all of this is happening, China is moving diplomatically as well. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is set to visit North Korea for talks with his counterpart on April 9th and 10th. That may not sound dramatic at first glance, but the significance is in the timing and the rarity. The last publicly known visit by a Chinese foreign minister to North Korea was back in 2019. In other words, this is not the kind of exchange that has been happening constantly in the background. It stands out. Relations between China and North Korea have not looked especially warm in recent years, at least not compared with earlier periods. So why move closer now? Why reopen higher-level visible contact at this moment, while North Korea is testing missiles and advertising unconventional weapons? The answer may lie in the regional map, not in the bilateral relationship alone.
If China is seriously thinking through the military implications of a future Taiwan scenario, then it has every reason to consider the wider theater. A Taiwan conflict would not stay neatly confined. It would pull in naval forces, air assets, alliance commitments, logistics chains, and political pressure across the region. In that kind of environment, North Korea becomes useful to Beijing, even if it never formally joins a war. It could apply pressure on South Korea. It could threaten Japan. It could force the United States to split resources, attention, and planning bandwidth. Even the possibility of that is strategically valuable. That does not mean China is ordering North Korea around like a puppet. International politics is rarely that simple, but it does mean their interests can overlap in ways that matter, and right now those overlapping interests deserve attention.
Meanwhile, inside North Korea, the regime continues to pour resources into military development while its population lives under severe economic strain. That contrast has always defined the country. Ordinary people struggle, the state prioritizes weapons, missile programs advance while the public pays the price. That is not new, but what is important is what it tells us about intent. North Korea is not behaving like a country that sees its arsenal as finished. It is behaving like a country that wants more range, more complexity, more survivability, more options, and more leverage. So step back and look at the full picture. North Korea has launched multiple ballistic missiles. It appears to be accelerating work on systems meant to attack not just troops or cities directly, but the infrastructure that keeps a modern society running. It is pursuing more advanced warhead delivery concepts through MIRV development. And at the same time, China is re-engaging diplomatically in a way that could carry serious regional implications if tensions over Taiwan continue to grow. That combination should not be dismissed as background noise. It may not dominate the news cycle the way some other global crises do, but stories like this have a habit of becoming far more important later than they seem in the moment. A missile test today can be written off as routine. A diplomatic visit can be framed as symbolic. A weapons claim can be brushed aside as propaganda. But when too many of those things start happening at once, they stop being isolated events. They start looking like pieces of a larger pattern. And that is the real takeaway here. The danger is not just in any single launch, any single bomb design, or any single meeting. The danger is in the direction all of it points. North Korea appears determined to widen the kinds of threats it can pose. China appears interested in drawing Pyongyang closer at a time of growing pressure across East Asia, and if a future crisis erupts over Taiwan, the rest of the region may not remain on the sidelines. So yes, this is a story worth watching, maybe much more than it seems right now.
Is North Korea simply trying to look bigger and stronger than it really is? Or do you think these moves reflect genuine progress that the US and its allies need to take far more seriously? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next update.